Content warning. This story contains violence and mature romantic themes. The vampire king of the Eastern Territories had survived assassination attempts, political coups, and 3 separate wars spanning continents. But watching him attempt a simple box step made Rebecca Garrison genuinely fear for his immortal dignity. "You're supposed to step forward with your left foot," she said, trying not to laugh as Silvanus Corvidae nearly trampled her toes for the 4th time in as many minutes. They were in her tiny apartment living room, furniture shoved against the walls, her laptop playing a scratchy Waltz tutorial on repeat. Outside, the city hummed with late evening traffic, oblivious to the fact that one of the most powerful creatures in the supernatural world was currently losing a battle against basic choreography. He stopped mid-step, his pale face arranged in an expression of profound irritation. His white hair caught the lamplight like spun silver, and even in jeans and a simple black shirt, concessions to the modern world he'd adopted with varying degrees of success, he looked like something carved from moonlight and old prayers. Beautiful, dangerous, and at this particular moment, absolutely ridiculous. "I am stepping forward with my left foot," he said with the kind of dignity usually reserved for the treaty negotiations. "That was your right foot." It most certainly was not. Rebecca bit her lip, fighting the smile threatening to break free. She'd known Silvanus for 3 months now, ever since he'd walked into the independent bookstore where she worked and asked for a first edition Dante in the original Italian with the kind of casual assumption that suggested he'd probably met Dante personally. Their friendship had grown in the spaces between her lunch breaks and his apparently endless free time. Conversations about literature bleeding into coffee that became dinner, that became this strange, fluttering thing in her chest every time he looked at her with those mercury bright eyes. She'd been falling for him slowly, she realized, like someone walking down a hill in the dark, each step taking her deeper into territory she couldn't quite map. And then yesterday, when she'd been frantically texting everyone she knew because her sister's wedding was in 2 days and her planned dance partner had caught the flu, he'd appeared at the bookstore with that particular tilt to his head that meant he was plotting something. "I could accompany you," he'd said, as if offering to escort her to a wedding where she'd need to waltz in front of 200 people was equivalent to suggesting they grab lunch. She'd said yes before her brain caught up with her mouth, because of course she had. Because he made her reckless and brave and stupidly hopeful in ways she hadn't been since her disaster of a college relationship, had taught her that fairy tales were just stories people told to make loneliness feel intentional. Except now, she was watching him attempt to navigate a basic waltz with all the grace of a newborn giraffe, and she was starting to wonder if this had been a terrible idea. "Again," he said, his jaw set with the kind of determination she imagined he'd brought to conquering kingdoms. "From the beginning." They'd been at this for 3 hours. Rebecca's feet ached, her patience was wearing thin, and she was starting to suspect that vampiric immortality didn't actually confer any benefits to coordination whatsoever. But there was something endearing about watching this ancient, powerful creature struggle with something so fundamentally human, something simple that nevertheless eluded him completely. He could move with liquid grace when he fought she'd seen him once, in an alley behind the bookstore, dispatch 3 rogue vampires with the kind of elegant brutality that had made her breath catch, but ask him to count to 3 and step in a box, and he became a fumbling mess of misplaced limbs and wounded pride. "Why did you agree to this?" she asked softly as she reset their position, his cool hand finding hers, his other hand settling at her waist with the kind of careful precision that suggested he was very aware of exactly how fragile humans were. "You clearly hate dancing." Something flickered across his face too fast for her to read. "I don't hate dancing," he said, which was obviously a lie given how his shoulders had tensed. "I'm simply out of practice." "How out of practice are we talking?" "I last danced in 1227. Rebecca stared at him. "That's not out of practice. That's archaeological." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Nevertheless, I made you a promise. I will learn this damn dance if it takes all night." And he meant it. She could tell. There was something fierce in his eyes, something that went beyond simple stubbornness. He'd do this for her, would make himself vulnerable and clumsy and ridiculous, would spend hours stepping on her feet and mangling the rhythm, all because she needed him, and he'd said yes. That was when she knew, with absolute certainty, that she wasn't just falling anymore. She'd already fallen, had probably been in love with him for weeks without admitting it, and watching him struggle through a waltz with grim determination was somehow the thing that made her heart crack wide open. "Okay," she said, squeezing his hand. "One more time, slow, just feel the music." They started again, and this time he made it through almost 8 counts before his feet betrayed him. Rebecca laughed, helpless and delighted, and after a moment Silvanus laughed too, a low rumble that she felt more than heard. "This is humiliating," he murmured, but he was almost smiling. "This is charming," she corrected. "I am the vampire king of the Eastern Territories. I am not charming. I am fearsome and commanding, and we poor currently stepping on my foot." He looked down, discovered she was right, and made a noise of pure frustration that had no business being as attractive as it was. Rebecca's heart was doing complicated acrobatics in her chest, and she had to resist the urge to just stand on her toes and kiss him. Consequences be damned. But they hadn't crossed that line yet, were still dancing around each other in ways that had nothing to do with waltzes, and she wasn't sure if what she felt was returned, or if she was just another brief diversion in an immortal life. So instead she said, "Tell me why you really haven't danced in 800 years. His hands tightened fractionally on hers, on her waist. The music played on, tinny through her laptop speakers, and outside a siren wailed past. "It's not a pleasant story," he said finally. "I'm not asking for pleasant. I'm asking for true." He was quiet for a long moment, and Rebecca waited, learning the specific quality of his silences. This one felt heavy, weighted with old grief. "There was a ball," he said at last, his voice careful, each word chosen with precision. "In Venice, 1227, a gathering of the great vampire houses to celebrate a treaty I'd spent decades negotiating. Peace, finally, after centuries of bloodshed. I was younger then, more trusting. I believed in diplomacy, in the power of words and agreements." He guided her through a turn without thinking, his body remembering the rhythm even as his conscious mind struggled with it. Rebecca followed, listening. "My closest advisor, a vampire named Alexandros, had been with me for 300 years, brother in all but blood. I trusted him with my kingdom, my strategies, my life. The night of the ball, while I was dancing with the Duchess of the Northern Reaches, Alexandros signaled to assassins hidden among the guests. They moved during the second waltz, killed 17 vampires before we could stop them, including the Duchess in my arms, nearly killed me. The treaty dissolved in blood and accusations, and the war that followed lasted 40 years. His voice had gone flat, emotionless in the way that meant the emotion was too large to let out. Rebecca's throat tightened. "Alexandros?" she asked quietly. "I executed him myself, as was my right and duty, but the damage was done. The ballroom became associated with betrayal, with the feeling of holding someone while they died, with my own catastrophic failure of judgment. I haven't attended a ball since, haven't danced, haven't allowed myself the vulnerability of it." Rebecca understood then, with sudden clarity, what it meant that he was here in her cramped apartment, fumbling through a waltz he could barely execute. He wasn't just learning steps. He was walking back into a trauma 8 centuries old, confronting the thing he'd locked away and avoided, all because she'd asked him to. "Silvanus," she whispered, and something in her voice made him meet her eyes. "You don't have to do this. We can skip the dance, I can make excuses, say I twisted my ankle, whatever. You don't have to go back to that place for me." His hand came up, cool fingers brushing her cheek with such gentleness it made her breath catch. "I do, though," he said softly. "Because somewhere in the last 3 months, you became important to me in ways I didn't anticipate. Because when you smile at me over coffee and tell me about the book you're reading, I forget that I'm ancient and tired and have seen too much. Because you make me want to be brave again, even about small things, especially about small things." Rebecca's heart was thundering so loud she was certain he could hear it. Vampires could hear heartbeats, she knew that much. Could probably read every emotional spike, every surge of adrenaline and want and terrified hope. "I'm in love with you," she said, because apparently her mouth had decided that filters were optional. "Just so you know, in case that affects your decision-making process or whatever." Silvanus went very still, his hand still cupping her cheek. His eyes were wide, something like wonder flickering across his face. "Rebecca," he said, and her name in his voice sounded like a prayer, like something sacred. "I have lived for 943 years. I have seen empires rise and fall, have walked through centuries of human history, have loved and lost and learned to protect myself from feeling too deeply. And then you walked into my existence with your terrible coffee orders and your passionate rants about symbolism and Gothic literature, and you made me feel like the world might still hold surprises. Like I might still be capable of something beyond survival. Is that a yes? Rebecca asked because she needed the words, needed the clarity. That is a deeply inadequate attempt to express that I am completely, inconveniently in love with you, Silvanus said. And that I would learn 1,000 dances, would make a fool of myself in front of armies, would do anything you asked because you gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever. Then he was kissing her, or she was kissing him, and it didn't matter who moved first because they were finally crossing that line they'd been circling for months. His lips were cool against hers, his hand sliding into her hair, and Rebecca made a small sound of surprise and delight as he pulled her closer. He kissed like he did everything else with intensity and focus and a bone-deep certainty that made her knees weak. When they broke apart, both slightly breathless despite his lack of need for air, Rebecca was grinning like an idiot. "We should probably keep practicing," she said. "The wedding's in 2 days." Silvanus groaned. "Must we? You promised." "I am regretting that promise intensely." "Liar." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face, and Rebecca thought that she could happily spend the rest of her life making him smile like that. They practiced until 3 a.m, until Rebecca's feet were throbbing and Silvanus had managed to make it through an entire waltz with only 2 major mistakes. "Progress," she declared, and he'd kissed her again as a reward. And by the time he left, he still kept his own residence, an absurdly expensive penthouse across town that she'd visited exactly once and found both intimidating and oddly sterile. Rebecca was floating. The next day at the bookstore passed in a haze of distraction. Her co-worker Melanie commented 3 times that Rebecca seemed unusually cheerful, and Rebecca just smiled and said nothing, hugging the secret of Silvanus close. They hadn't discussed going public with their relationship yet, and given that he was a 900-year-old vampire king and she was a human retail worker with student loans, there were probably complications to navigate. But those were problems for future Rebecca. Present Rebecca was just happy. Silvanus met her after her shift, and they spent the evening at his place practicing the waltz in his vast, empty living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He was getting better. His movements less stiff, though he still counted under his breath with intense concentration that made her want to kiss him constantly. "Tell me about your sister," he said during a break, both of them sitting on his obscenely expensive couch with takeout Thai food that he didn't eat, but had ordered because Rebecca did. "Natalie is great," Rebecca said, twirling pad thai around her fork. 3 years older, much more put together than me. She's a lawyer, she's marrying another lawyer, they're basically perfect together. The wedding's going to be this huge, elegant affair at the Ashford estate. You know it?" Something shifted in Silvanus's expression. "The Ashford estate," he repeated slowly. "Yeah, it's this beautiful old mansion on the edge of the city. Historic, gorgeous ballroom. Very..." She stopped, catching the look on his face. "What's wrong?" He was quiet for a moment, his jaw tight. The Ashford estate sits on what was, until 1956, acknowledged vampire territory. When the family sold it to humans, it created a territorial dispute that was never fully resolved. Some of the older houses still consider it contested ground. Rebecca's stomach dropped. "Is that going to be a problem?" "Potentially. I'll need to make inquiries, see who might take issue with my presence there." He must have seen the worry on her face because he took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "It will be fine, Rebecca. I'm not without influence. I'll handle it." But there was something in his voice that suggested it might not be quite that simple. The day of the wedding dawned bright and cold, early October weather that couldn't decide between summer and fall. Rebecca woke in Silvanus's bed. They'd fallen asleep there after a late-night practice session. Though sleeping together still meant just sleeping, both of them seemingly content to take things slow to find him already awake, staring at the ceiling with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Nervous?" she asked, propping herself up on one elbow. He turned to look at her, and something in his eyes made her breath catch. "I should tell you something," he said, "about tonight." Rebecca waited, her heart picking up speed. "I received word yesterday that Alexandros' sister, Katerina, will be at the wedding. She married into the family that still disputes the Ashford territory, and she's apparently connected to your sister's husband's family somehow. I didn't want to worry you, but you deserve to know that tonight may be complicated." Complicated how? Katerina blamed me for her brother's death. Never mind that he orchestrated the murder of 17 vampires and attempted regicide. In her eyes, I'm the villain. If she sees me there, on disputed territory, she may view it as provocation. Rebecca sat up fully, processing this. So we're potentially walking into a vampire political incident at my sister's wedding. I would never let anything happen to you or your family, Silvanus said immediately, sitting up as well, taking both her hands. Rebecca, I swear it. I've made arrangements, called in favors. There will be others there tonight, vampires loyal to me, watching. If Katerina tries anything, it will be contained before it becomes a problem. Maybe you shouldn't come, Rebecca said, even though the words hurt. If your being there puts people at risk, I'm coming, he said firmly. I made you a promise, and more than that, I refuse to let old ghosts dictate my life anymore. I've been running from ballrooms and dances and the vulnerability of ritual for 800 years. Tonight, I reclaim that, with you. There was steel in his voice, determination that made Rebecca believe he could actually pull this off. She squeezed his hands. Okay, she said, but if things go sideways, you get my family out first. Promise me. I promise. The wedding ceremony itself was beautiful. Rebecca sat in the third row, watching her sister marry Daniel with tears streaming down her face, because Natalie looked radiant and happy and so deeply in love that it made Rebecca's chest ache. Silvanus sat beside her in an immaculately tailored suit, his white hair pulled back looking like he'd stepped out of a Renaissance painting. He held her hand through the vows, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, and Rebecca felt simultaneously grounded and like she was floating. After the ceremony, during the cocktail hour before the reception, Silvanus excused himself to handle some business which Rebecca suspected meant doing whatever political maneuvering was necessary to ensure the night went smoothly. She mingled with relatives, accepted compliments on her dress, a deep emerald thing that had cost more than she'd wanted to spend, but made her feel beautiful, and tried not to think about vampire politics and territorial disputes. Natalie found her near the bar, glowing with newlywed joy. Is that him? She whispered, nodding toward where Silvanus had just reappeared, talking with a severe-looking woman in black that Rebecca didn't recognize. The guy you've been secretly dating? Rebecca flushed. I haven't been secretly dating anyone. Please, you've had that look for weeks, and he's gorgeous in a very unsettling way. What does he do? He's in international relations, Rebecca said, which was technically true if you considered vampire politics international relations. Natalie raised an eyebrow, but was pulled away by more well-wishers before she could interrogate further. Rebecca made her way over to Silvanus, who dismissed the woman in black with a subtle nod. Everything okay? Rebecca asked. For now, Katerina is here, as expected. I've spoken with her. She's agreed to maintain the peace for tonight, but she wanted me to know that she considers my presence an insult to her brother's memory. His jaw was tight. I explained that I considered her brother's betrayal an insult to the 17 vampires he murdered, and we agreed to disagree. That sounds tense. Vampire diplomacy usually is. He offered her his arm. Shall we head to the reception? I believe we have a dance to perform. The ballroom at the Ashford estate was everything Rebecca had promised. High ceilings painted with fading frescoes, crystal chandeliers, tall windows that overlooked manicured gardens. It had been decorated within an inch of its life with flowers and candles, transforming it into something out of a fairy tale. Guests filled round tables, champagne flowed, and a small band set up in the corner where they'd later play for dancing. Rebecca and Silvanus were seated at a table with some of her cousins, who spent dinner asking polite questions that Silvanus deflected with the ease of someone who'd spent centuries navigating social situations. Rebecca watched him charm her family with carefully chosen stories that revealed nothing substantial about himself, and she wondered what it must be like to have lived so long that you had to curate your past into something digestible for mortals. After dinner, after the toasts and cake cutting, the dancing began. Natalie and Daniel took the floor first for their first dance, moving together with practiced ease that made Rebecca's heart swell. Then the floor opened up and other couples joined in. Ready? Silvanus asked quietly, and Rebecca heard the tension beneath the question. Are you? He stood, offering his hand with a courtly gesture that probably came from actual courts he'd actually attended. Let's find out. They walked to the dance floor together, and Rebecca was aware of people watching her family, curious about her mysterious date, Probably some supernatural observers tracking the vampire king's first dance in 8 centuries. The band started a waltz, the same one they'd been practicing, and Silvanus pulled Rebecca into position. For the first few counts, he was stiff, his movements mechanical as he counted under his breath. Rebecca could feel the tension in him, the weight of memory and trauma and 800 years of avoidance. But then she squeezed his hand and smiled up at him, and something in his expression softened. "Just you and me," she whispered. "Forget everyone else." Silvanus took a breath he didn't need, and then they were moving. He stumbled once, caught himself, kept going. His feet tangled briefly, and Rebecca compensated, keeping them upright. But gradually, as the music continued, as they turned around the floor between other couples, something shifted. His shoulders relaxed, his grip on her hand became less desperate and more assured. He stopped counting out loud, started moving with something approaching confidence. He wasn't graceful, wasn't the effortlessly perfect dancer that 800 years of existence might have made him. But he was present, engaged, choosing to be vulnerable in this moment because it mattered, because she mattered. Rebecca looked up at him and found him already watching her, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. There was wonder there, and relief, and something that looked like joy. "I'm doing it," he said, almost disbelieving. "You're doing it," she confirmed, laughing. "I'm dancing, at a ball, and nothing terrible is happening." Correct on all counts. He spun her then, a slightly wobbly turn that nevertheless worked, and when he pulled her back in, he was smiling. Really, truly smiling, like something had broken open inside him. They danced through the rest of the waltz, and if Silvanus made mistakes, and he did, several, it didn't matter. What mattered was that he was here, that he was trying, that he'd chosen to face his demons in a ballroom because Rebecca had needed a dance partner, and he'd said yes. When the song ended, Rebecca stood on her toes and kissed him, right there in front of her family and the guests and whatever supernatural observers were watching. Silvanus kissed her back, his hand cupping her face, and Rebecca heard her cousin whistle appreciatively. "Thank you," Silvanus murmured against her lips. "For what?" "For making me believe that dances can be joyful again, that ballrooms don't have to be places of betrayal, that I can reclaim things I thought I'd lost forever." Rebecca was trying to formulate a response when she felt the shift in the room, the sudden tension that made Silvanus's entire body go rigid. She turned to see a woman approaching, tall, white-haired like all vampires, with features that suggested Eastern European heritage and eyes like chips of ice. She wore a black dress that looked like mourning, and she walked with the kind of predatory grace that marked her immediately as dangerous. "Katerina," Silvanus said, his voice gone flat and cold. "Your Majesty," the woman replied with mocking courtesy. "How touching! Watching you stumble around the dance floor like a child learning his steps? My brother would have been amused." "Your brother was a traitor who murdered innocent people," Silvanus said quietly. "And I won't have this conversation here at a human wedding celebration. We agreed. We agreed I wouldn't start a fight. I'm not fighting. I'm simply observing that you seem to have moved on remarkably well from the tragedy of 1227, dancing again, as if all those deaths meant nothing, taking a human pet, flaunting her in front of the old families on disputed ground." Rebecca felt Silvanus's hand tighten on hers, felt the rage rolling off him in waves. But his voice when he spoke was controlled, careful. "Rebecca is not a pet. She is the woman I love, and I won't apologize for choosing to heal rather than wallow in the past." Katerina's eyes flicked to Rebecca, assessing and dismissive. "Love. How quaint. How temporary. You'll blink and she'll be dead, Silvanus. 60 years if she's lucky, probably less. And you'll be alone again, remembering another face that turned to dust." "That's enough," Silvanus said, and there was power in his voice now, the authority of 900 years and a crown that meant something even in modern times. "You've said your piece. Now leave before I forget that I'm trying to be diplomatic." "I'm leaving," Katerina said, "but I want her to know that my brother was worth 10 of you, that the people he killed were collaborators with a king who'd grown weak and complacent, that his only mistake was failing to finish the job." She turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd before Silvanus could respond. Rebecca felt him trembling with suppressed rage, his cool skin somehow feeling colder. "I'm sorry," he said tightly. "I'm so sorry you had to hear that." "She's wrong," Rebecca said firmly, pulling him to look at her. "About everything. You're not weak. You're brave, and whatever time we have together, whether it's 60 years or 60 minutes, it matters. It's worth it." Silvanus closed his eyes, his forehead dropping to rest against hers. "I should have killed her along with her brother," he murmured, "but she was young then, barely a century old, and I thought mercy would mean something." "It did mean something. It meant you weren't the monster she thinks you are." They stood there for a moment, wrapped in each other, while the party continued around them, and Rebecca felt the weight of what they were attempting. She was human, fragile, and temporary. He was ancient and powerful, and carried centuries of trauma. The world would tell them this was impossible, that the gap between their lives was too vast to bridge, but Rebecca had never been good at listening to what she was supposed to do, and Silvanus had spent 800 years avoiding ballrooms until she'd given him a reason to try again. "Dance with me again," she said suddenly. "One more time. Show her and everyone else that you're not defined by old betrayals, that you get to choose joy." Silvanus pulled back, looking at her with such tenderness it made her chest ache. "You are terrifyingly optimistic," he said. "You say that like it's a bad thing." "It's not. It's just that I've spent centuries being cynical, and you make me want to believe in things again." The band was starting another waltz, and Silvanus led her back onto the floor. This time he didn't stumble once, his movements sure and steady even if they weren't exactly smooth. They danced, and Rebecca was aware of her sister watching with a pleased smile, of her parents looking curious but approving, of the other guests giving them space. And in the shadows, barely visible, Rebecca caught glimpses of other pale figures watching Silvanus's people, she assumed, the vampires loyal to him, who'd come to ensure the night went smoothly. It should have been unsettling, knowing that supernatural politics were playing out around her sister's wedding reception. But somehow it just made her more determined to focus on this moment, on the man in her arms who was choosing vulnerability over safety, joy over old wounds. When the dance ended, Silvanus kissed her again, slower this time, sweeter. "I need to handle something," he murmured against her lips. "Katerina's appearance means there may be complications I need to address before they escalate. Will you be all right for a bit?" "I'll be fine. Go do your king thing." He smiled at that, a flash of amusement that made him look younger. "My king thing?" Very dignified. "You love it. I love you," he corrected, and then he was gone, moving through the crowd with purpose. Rebecca found her sister by the cake table, sneaking bites of frosting despite having already had her official slice. "So," Natalie said, "your boyfriend is intense." "That's one word for it. Is he good to you?" Rebecca thought about Silvanus learning to waltz overnight because she'd needed him to, about the way he looked at her like she was something precious and surprising, about his willingness to face down 800 years of trauma because she'd asked. "Yeah," she said softly, "he's good to me." "Then I approve, even if he does look like he stepped out of a Tim Burton movie." Rebecca laughed, and they stood together watching the party, watching their parents dance badly to a swing number, watching Daniel's family doing terrible group photos. It was normal and mundane and beautiful, exactly what a wedding should be, until the lights went out. The ballroom plunged into darkness, and for a moment there was just confused murmuring from the guests. Then the emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in dim, eerie illumination. Rebecca's heart kicked into overdrive, her mind immediately jumping to vampire politics and territorial disputes and all the things that could go wrong. Silvanus appeared at her side so fast it was like he'd materialized from shadow. "Stay with your sister," he said urgently. "Don't leave this room, don't go near the windows, and if I tell you to get down, you get down. Understand?" "What's happening?" "Katerina brought friends. They've triggered the estate's fail-safes. This building has old vampire defenses built into it from before it was sold. Someone's trying to trap us here." His eyes were glowing slightly in the dim light, an effect Rebecca had never seen before that made him look distinctly inhuman. "I need to handle this. Please, stay safe." Then he was gone again, moving toward the ballroom's main doors where Rebecca could now see figures gathering. Other vampires, she realized, both Silvanus's people and presumably Katerina's. The human guests were starting to panic, people pulling out phones that wouldn't work because of course the signal was out, parents pulling children close. Natalie grabbed Rebecca's arm. "What is happening?" she hissed. "It's complicated," Rebecca said, positioning herself between her sister and the door. "Just stay calm. It's going to be fine." She hoped that was true. At the far end of the ballroom, Silvanus was facing off against Katerina and 3 other vampires Rebecca didn't recognize. Their voices were too low for human hearing, but Rebecca could see the tension in every line of Silvanus's body, could read the danger in the way the other vampires positioned themselves. Then Katerina moved, a blur of motion, and Silvanus moved to intercept. They collided with force that shouldn't have been possible, bodies moving faster than Rebecca could track. The other vampires joined in, and suddenly, there was fighting happening in the middle of her sister's wedding reception. Screaming erupted from the human guests. People scattered, trying to get away from the violence, but the doors wouldn't open. They were trapped, just like Silvanus had said. Rebecca saw one of the hostile vampires break away from the fight, saw him moving toward the cluster of panicking humans, and her blood went cold. But before he could reach them, another vampire intercepted a tall woman with white hair and a severe braid who Rebecca recognized from earlier, the one Silvanus had been talking to. They grappled, crashing into a table that splintered under the impact. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. Except it was, because Rebecca had fallen in love with a vampire king, and apparently that came with consequences she hadn't fully considered. Silvanus had one of Katerina's allies pinned against the wall, his hand around the vampire's throat, when Katerina herself came at him from behind. Rebecca saw it happening, saw the danger, and without thinking, she screamed his name. Silvanus spun, caught Katerina's wrist before her hand could close on his neck, twisted. There was a sickening crack, and Katerina hissed in pain and fury. He threw her across the room, where she crashed into the band's equipment with the screech of feedback. "Enough!" Silvanus's voice boomed through the ballroom, carrying a weight of authority that made everyone freeze. The other vampires stopped fighting, turning to look at him. Even Katerina, cradling her broken wrist, went still. "This ends now," Silvanus continued, his voice deadly calm. "Katerina, you want revenge for your brother's death. I understand that. But he was guilty of mass murder and attempted regicide, and I administered justice according to our laws. You disagree with that verdict. Fine. But attacking me at a human wedding on neutral ground, threatening innocent people who have nothing to do with our politics, that makes you exactly what your brother was. A threat to the stability we've fought to maintain." "You murdered him," Katerina spat, struggling to her feet. "You killed the only family I had." "No, I executed a criminal according to the laws he swore to uphold when he entered my service. There's a difference." Silvanus's voice gentled slightly. "Katerina, I know you're in pain. I know grief makes us into people we don't recognize. But this path you're on, it only ends in your death. And despite everything, I don't want that." "Why?" Katerina demanded. "Why would you care?" "Because I remember when you were young. Because your brother, before his betrayal, was my friend. Because I'm tired of executions and death and vampires destroying each other over old wounds." He gestured around the ballroom at the terrified humans huddled together, at the damaged decorations. "This is a celebration. Two people declaring their love in front of their community. It's supposed to be joyful, and we've turned it into a battlefield because we can't let go of the past." There was a long silence. Rebecca held her breath, Natalie's hand tight in hers. "I will give you a choice," Silvanus said to Katerina. "Swear peace, acknowledge that your brother's execution was lawful, and I will welcome you back into the community with full rights and protections. Continue this vendetta, and I will have no choice but to exile you from the Eastern Territories permanently. Choose now." Katerina looked at him with eyes full of hate and grief and something that might have been exhausted recognition. "You promise my brother was guilty?" she asked, her voice suddenly small. "You swear it wasn't political? Wasn't you eliminating a threat to your power?" "I swear it on my crown and my honor. He orchestrated the murders. I have the evidence, testimony from survivors, his own words before he died. I loved him as a brother, Katerina. His betrayal destroyed something in me that took centuries to heal, but he was guilty." Another silence, stretching tight as wire. Then Katerina's shoulders slumped. "I swear peace," she said quietly. "I acknowledge the justice of the execution. I withdraw my claim of vendetta." The tension in the room broke like a snap string. The other hostile vampires immediately stood down, recognizing the formal oath for what it was. Silvanus's people relaxed fractionally, though they remained alert. Silvanus crossed to Katerina, held out his hand. After a moment's hesitation, she took it. "Your wrist," he said. "I'll have someone tend to it. It will heal." Nevertheless, he gestured to one of his vampires who came forward to escort Katerina out. The other hostile vampires followed, and suddenly the ballroom held only Silvanus's people and a whole lot of traumatized humans. Silvanus immediately turned to the crowd, his expression shifting from commanding to reassuring. I apologize for the disturbance, he said, his voice caring but gentle now. There was a security concern that's been resolved. You're all safe, and the doors will open momentarily. Please, for your own peace of mind, consider this evening concluded. The wedding couple will be compensated for the disruption. His people were already moving, doing something to the doors that made them suddenly swing open. Guests began streaming out, some running, others walking quickly while casting fearful glances back. Rebecca saw her parents hurrying toward her and Natalie, her mother's face pale with shock. "Girls, we need to leave," her father said urgently. "I'm fine, Dad," Natalie said, though her voice was shaky. "We're fine." Those people were... Her mother couldn't seem to find words. "There was a fight," Rebecca said. "It's over now. Everyone's safe." Her parents didn't look convinced, but they were already ushering Natalie and Daniel toward the exit. Rebecca tried to follow, but Natalie stopped her. "Go to him," her sister said quietly, nodding toward Silvanus, who was speaking with his people across the room. "Whatever's happening between you two, he looks like he needs you right now." Rebecca hugged her sister fiercely. "I'm sorry your wedding got interrupted." "Are you kidding? We'll be talking about this for years. Most exciting reception ever." Natalie managed a weak smile. "Just be careful, okay? I don't know what he is exactly, but I'm not stupid." "I will be." Rebecca made her way through the emptying ballroom to Silvanus, who dismissed his people when he saw her approaching. He looked exhausted in a way she'd never seen, his shoulders tense, his face drawn. "Are you hurt?" she asked immediately, looking him over for injuries. "No. Vampires are difficult to damage." His voice was flat, distant. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Rebecca. I should never have come tonight. I put you and your family in danger because I was too proud to admit that my presence would cause problems." "Stop," Rebecca said firmly, taking his hands. "You didn't cause this. Katerina did, and you handled it. You stopped the fight, made peace, probably saved lives. You did everything right. Your sister's wedding is ruined." "My sister's wedding was memorable. There's a difference." She squeezed his hands, trying to pull him back from whatever dark place his mind was going. "Silvanus, look at me." He met her eyes, and the pain there made her chest ache. "You got to dance," she said softly. "In a ballroom, at a ball, and yes, things went sideways afterward, but you did it. You faced the thing that scared you, and you reclaimed it. You stood in a space like the one where you were betrayed, and you chose joy instead of fear. That matters." "Does it? When the cost was terrorizing innocent people?" "Yes, because you also chose mercy. You could have killed Katerina. She attacked you, tried to harm people under your protection. But you offered her peace instead. You broke the cycle." Silvanus was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. "How are you so certain?" he asked finally. "How do you have such faith that things can be better?" "Because I fell in love with a vampire king who learned to waltz for me," Rebecca said. "Because you're proof that people can change, can heal, can choose to be brave even when it's hard. If you can do that after 900 years, then yeah, I have faith that things can be better." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. She felt him trembling, centuries of control cracking just enough to let the emotion through. "I don't deserve you," he murmured into her hair. "Tough. You're stuck with me anyway." They stood like that while the last few people filtered out of the ballroom, while Silvanus's people finished securing the estate, while the night settled into something approaching calm. Eventually, Silvanus pulled back, cupping Rebecca's face in his hands. "Come home with me," he said. "Please, I need to know you're safe." "Okay." They left the Ashford estate together, Silvanus's car waiting in the circular drive. Rebecca texted her sister that she was leaving, got back a string of heart emojis and a message to use protection that made her flush bright red. The drive back to Silvanus's penthouse was quiet, both of them processing the events of the evening. Once inside, with the door locked and the city spread out below them through the massive windows, Silvanus seemed to relax incrementally. He poured Rebecca a glass of wine. He kept it stocked for her even though he couldn't drink it, and they sat together on the couch. "What happens now?" Rebecca asked. "With Katerina, with the territorial dispute, all of it?" "Katerina's oath was binding. She'll honor it or face exile, and she's not foolish enough to choose exile. The territorial dispute will be resolved through proper channels now that we've demonstrated both sides want peace." and I will spend the next several weeks in tedious political meetings ensuring that tonight's events don't spiral into something worse. Sounds fun. It's supremely boring, actually. He set down her wine glass, took her hands. But I want you with me through it. Not at the meetings, obviously, but after. In my life, in my space, in whatever future we're building together. Rebecca's heart kicked into a higher gear. Are you asking me to move in with you? Eventually, if you want to. I know it's fast by human standards, but I've spent 900 years alone, Rebecca. Now that I've found you, I don't want to waste time pretending I'm not completely certain about this. I'm certain too, Rebecca said, and it was true. She'd been falling for months, and tonight had just confirmed what she already knew, that Silvanus was worth whatever complications came with loving him. But maybe we take it a little slower than immediately moving in together. I have a lease, a life, a job. Keep all of those things. I'm not asking you to give up your independence. Just spend your nights here with me. Let me wake up to you every evening. Let me be part of your mundane, beautiful human life. Every evening, Rebecca teased. You're nocturnal, remember? I wake up in the morning. Then I'll stay awake to see it. I'll watch every sunrise with you until I can't anymore, then sleep knowing you're here when I wake. It was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to her, and Rebecca had to blink back tears. You're making it really hard to take things slow, she said. Good. He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promise. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright. I have 900 years of romance to make up for. I intend to be thoroughly excessive about it. Rebecca laughed, kissed him again. They stayed on the couch for hours, talking about everything and nothing, making plans and promises, building the foundation of whatever this was going to be. Eventually, Rebecca dozed off against his shoulder, exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the day. She woke near dawn to find Silvanus carrying her to his bed, settling her under the covers with careful tenderness. He stretched out beside her, fully clothed, and pulled her close. Thank you, he whispered, thinking she was still asleep, for making me brave again, for giving me reasons to dance. Rebecca smiled against his chest and let sleep pull her back under. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that felt startlingly normal despite the supernatural elements. Rebecca spent her days working at the bookstore, her nights with Silvanus. They had dinner together even though he didn't eat, went to movies, took walks through the city's older neighborhoods where Silvanus would occasionally point out buildings he remembered being built. He attended tedious political meetings that he complained about extensively, and Rebecca learned more about vampire politics than she'd ever wanted to know. Natalie called frequently, wanting to know all the details about Rebecca's mysterious boyfriend. Rebecca carefully edited the vampire parts, but told her sister everything else, how Silvanus made her laugh, how he listened when she talked about her day, how he was teaching her about art history, and she was teaching him about contemporary literature. He sounds perfect, Natalie said during one call, except for the whole disrupting my wedding thing. Are you ever going to let that go? Probably not, but I forgive him because you're happy. I haven't seen you this happy in years, Becca. It was true. Rebecca was happy in ways she hadn't known were possible, ways that felt sustainable and real rather than the temporary high of infatuation. Silvanus was complex and sometimes difficult, carried trauma that occasionally made him withdraw, had political responsibilities that took him away for nights at a time. But he was also thoughtful and funny in a dry way that caught her off guard, protective without being controlling, willing to be vulnerable even when it scared him. 3 weeks after the wedding, Rebecca came home from work to find Silvanus in his living room with another vampire she didn't recognize. The stranger was male, white-haired like all vampires, with features that suggested Scandinavian heritage and eyes that assessed Rebecca with cool interest. Rebecca, Silvanus said, standing immediately. This is Magnus Thornfield, head of the Northern Council. Magnus, this is Rebecca Garrison. Magnus inclined his head politely. The human who convinced the vampire king of the Eastern Territories to dance again. I've heard much about you. All good things, I hope, Rebecca said, shaking his offered hand. His skin was cold like Silvanus's, his grip careful. Impressive things. It takes remarkable courage to love someone like Silvanus, to enter our world knowing its dangers. Rebecca glanced at Silvanus, who looked slightly uncomfortable. Is this a test? She asked Magnus directly. Are you here to decide if I'm suitable or whatever? Magnus's eyebrows rose, then he laughed. Direct, I appreciate that. And no, I'm here because Silvanus has requested a formal acknowledgement of your relationship in front of the council. Such acknowledgements are rare, usually reserved for vampires entering political alliances. That he's requesting one for a human is unprecedented. Rebecca's heart was suddenly pounding. She looked at Silvanus. What does that mean exactly? It means formal recognition that you are under my protection. Silvanus said carefully, that any vampire who harms you harms me, that our relationship is acknowledged and respected by the political powers in our world. It's significant. It's essentially a marriage announcement, Magnus said bluntly. Without the actual marriage, since vampire marriages are complex rituals that typically require both parties to be immortal, but it carries similar weight in our society. Rebecca felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. That's a big step, she said faintly. Too big? Silvanus asked, and she heard the vulnerability in his voice. She thought about it, about what it would mean to be formally tied to Silvanus in the eyes of vampire society. It would make her a target for his enemies, would complicate her life in ways she probably couldn't fully anticipate. But it would also protect her, would make clear that she wasn't just a temporary diversion, but someone important to one of the most powerful vampires in existence. Not too big, she said finally, just surprising. Yes, I want that. I want people to know that we're together, that this is real. Silvanus's entire face transformed with relief and joy. He crossed to her, kissed her thoroughly despite Magnus's presence. When he pulled back, he was smiling. The council meets in 2 weeks, Magnus said, tactfully looking out the window. We'll make the announcement then. Be prepared for attention, Miss Garrison. You're about to become quite famous in our world. After Magnus left, Silvanus pulled Rebecca down onto the couch beside him. Are you sure about this? He asked. Once the announcement is made, there's no taking it back. You'll be connected to me politically, socially, in every way that matters to vampire society. I'm sure. Are you sure? I'm human, Silvanus. I'll age, I'll die, I'll give you maybe 60 years if I'm lucky. That's nothing to you. That's everything to me, he said fiercely. Rebecca, I've lived for 900 years, and most of that was just existence, not living. These last few months with you have been more real, more vital than centuries of my immortal life. However much time we have, it will never be enough, but I'll take every moment I can get. There are ways to extend human life, Rebecca said carefully. I've been reading about vampire lore, blood exchanges, turning, other things. We could... No. Silvanus's voice was sharp. I won't turn you. I won't take your humanity from you, your ability to walk in daylight, your connection to your family and the human world. I won't make you into something you're not just to keep you longer. But, Rebecca, listen to me. Turning is not a gift. It's a curse that we make the best of. You lose so much sunlight, normal food, the ability to have children, the freedom to move through the world without constantly managing your hunger and hiding what you are. I won't do that to you. I love you too much to steal your humanity. Rebecca understood his reasoning, but it didn't stop the fear that coiled in her stomach when she thought about their future, about the vast difference in their lifespans. So what do? Just accept that this has an expiration date? We love each other as hard as we can for as long as we can. We make every day matter. And when the time comes that you're old and I'm not, we'll figure it out together. Maybe there will be options then that don't exist now. Maybe medical science will extend your life in ways that don't require vampirism. Or maybe we'll just have to accept that all love, even ours, is temporary in its own way. That's terrifying, Rebecca admitted. I know. But the alternative is not loving you at all, and that's not an option I'm willing to consider. He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. I learned to waltz for you, Rebecca. I faced down my oldest trauma because you needed me to. I'll find a way to make this work too. They sat in silence for a while, holding each other while the city lights flickered on below. Rebecca thought about the council meeting, about being formally announced as the Vampire King's partner, about the strange life she'd fallen into. It wasn't what she'd imagined for herself when she'd taken the job at the bookstore, wasn't anything she could have predicted, but it was hers, and it was real, and she wouldn't trade it for anything. The 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Silvanus coached Rebecca on council protocols, who to address and how, what questions to expect, how to navigate vampire social hierarchies without accidentally insulting anyone. He bought her a dress for the announcement that probably cost more than her car, midnight blue silk that made her feel like royalty. The night of the council meeting, Rebecca was more nervous than she'd been at her college graduation. The meeting was held in a mansion on the outskirts of the city, a sprawling estate that had apparently been vampire property for 300 years. Inside, it was all dark wood and crystal chandeliers and vampires in formal wear that ranged from modern suits to clothing that looked like it belonged in museums. Silvanus kept her close, his hand at the small of her back, introducing her to what felt like hundreds of vampires. Most were polite, some were curious, a few were openly hostile in subtle ways that Silvanus shut down with a single cold look. Rebecca smiled and made small talk and tried not to think about the fact that every person in this room could kill her without breaking a sweat. The formal announcement happened in a grand hall with the council members seated in a semicircle and Silvanus and Rebecca standing before them. Magnus Thornfield, as head of the Northern Council, spoke first, laying out the purpose of the gathering. Then Silvanus stepped forward. I come before this council to formally acknowledge my relationship with Rebecca Garrison, human resident of the city, and to request that she be granted protection under my name and title. His voice was formal, carrying the weight of ritual. I claim her as mine, offer her the shelter of my power, and declare that any who harm her will answer to me directly. There was a murmur through the assembled vampires. Magnus looked at Rebecca. Do you accept this protection, understanding what it means? That you will be bound to Silvanus Corvidae in the eyes of our society, that his enemies become your enemies, that you may be called upon to represent him in political matters? Rebecca's mouth was dry, but she kept her voice steady. I accept. Then let it be recorded, Magnus said formally. Rebecca Garrison is acknowledged as protected consort to Silvanus Corvidae, vampire king of the Eastern Territories. Let all present bear witness. The vampires in the hall there had to be at least 200 of them spoke in unison, witnessed and acknowledged. And just like that, it was done. Rebecca was officially part of vampire society, tied to Silvanus in ways that would have seemed impossible a few months ago. The formality of it should have felt strange, but instead it felt right, like a piece clicking into place. After the ceremony, there was a reception. Vampires approached to congratulate them, to meet Rebecca properly, to establish connections and alliances. Rebecca shook more hands than she could count, learned the names of vampire houses spanning continents, navigated political conversations that would have been beyond her a month ago. She was talking with a vampire from the Southern Territories about literary symbolism. Apparently, immortals had a lot of time to read when she saw Katerina across the room. The other vampire caught her eye, hesitated, then approached. Rebecca Garrison, Katerina said formally, I wanted to offer my congratulations and my apologies for the disruption at your sister's wedding. Rebecca was surprised enough that it took her a moment to respond. Thank you, for both. Silvanus is lucky to have found you. I hope you'll be happy together, for however long you have. There was genuine warmth in Katerina's voice, and Rebecca realized that the vampire was trying, in her own way, to make amends. Thank you, she said again. That means a lot. Katerina nodded and moved away, and Rebecca felt Silvanus appear at her side. That was unexpected, he murmured. Good unexpected, or bad unexpected? Good, I think. Katerina, honoring her oath of peace, publicly acknowledging our relationship, it helps solidify that the vendetta is truly over. So tonight's been successful? Tonight's been perfect. He took her hand, laced their fingers together. Though I'm ready to leave whenever you are. These events are exhausting, even when they're going well. They made their excuses and left, driving back to Silvanus's penthouse through streets still busy with late-night traffic. Inside, with the door closed and the formal clothes shed in favor of comfortable pajamas, Rebecca finally felt like she could breathe. That was intense, she said, collapsing onto Silvanus's bed. He stretched out beside her, propping himself up on one elbow to look down at her. You were magnificent. Half the council is in love with you now. The other half is intimidated by how well you handled yourself. I was terrified the entire time. And yet, you showed none of it. You smiled and charmed and held your own in conversations with vampires who have been playing political games since before your country existed. I was so proud of you, I could barely stand it. Rebecca pulled him down for a kiss, slow and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, she said, So we're officially together now, in front of Vampire Society and everything. Officially together, Silvanus confirmed, which means I can do this. He kissed her again, deeper. And this, his hand slid into her hair, and generally lavish you with attention without worrying about political implications. There were political implications before. Everything is political when you're 900 years old and technically royalty. They made love that night for the first time, slow and careful and full of discovery. Afterward, lying tangled together in the dark, Rebecca felt something settle in her chest that she hadn't even realized was unsettled. This was real. They were building something real, something that would last, even if it couldn't last forever. "I love you," she said into the darkness. "I love you too," Silvanus replied, his cool hand tracing patterns on her back. "Thank you for making me brave enough to dance again. Thank you for being patient with my terrible waltz skills. Thank you for choosing me despite everything that makes this complicated. Thank you for learning to waltz overnight because I needed a dance partner. Thank you for being willing to be bad at something for me. Thank you for choosing joy over fear." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and when Rebecca woke in the late morning to find Silvanus still beside her, he'd stayed awake to watch the sunrise with her. As promised, she thought that maybe fairy tales weren't just stories after all. Maybe sometimes you got the vampire king and the happy ending and the knowledge that whatever time you had together would be worth every complication. 3 months later, at Thanksgiving dinner with Rebecca's family, Silvanus charmed her parents with stories about historical events he'd witnessed and let Rebecca's nieces and nephews climb all over him like he was playground equipment. He was still terrible at dancing. Rebecca had tested him at a friend's party, and he'd stepped on her feet twice, but he tried anyway because she asked him to. 6 months after that, Rebecca moved into his penthouse officially, bringing her books and plants and the chaos of human living into his carefully curated space. He complained about the clutter while buying her more bookshelves, grumbled about the plants requiring sunlight while installing grow lights in rooms he'd never use. A year after the wedding where everything changed, Natalie had her first baby, and Silvanus held the infant with the kind of careful wonder that suggested he'd forgotten what new life looked like. Rebecca watched him rock her nephew and thought about the future, about the time they had and the time they wouldn't, and she chose gratitude over fear. 5 years in, when Rebecca was offered a job managing a bookstore in another city, they had their first real fight about whether she should take it, about how to balance her career with his political obligations. They worked it out, compromised, found a way to make both their needs matter. 10 years in, Rebecca's first gray hair appeared and Silvanus kissed it tenderly and told her she'd never been more beautiful. She asked again about extending her life, and he said no again, and they fought about it again and made up again and kept choosing each other anyway. But that was all future, all years that hadn't happened yet on that night when Silvanus learned to waltz overnight for Rebecca's sister's wedding. On that night, in the aftermath of political drama and old betrayals and dances reclaimed from trauma, they were just two people in love, building something real in the spaces between mortal and immortal, human and vampire, temporary and eternal. Silvanus had 2 left feet until Rebecca taught him to dance, and in learning, in stumbling through waltzes and facing down ballrooms and choosing vulnerability, he'd found something he'd thought lost forever: the ability to hope, to trust, to believe that joy was worth the risk of pain. Rebecca had been falling for a vampire king, endeared by his willingness to be bad at something for her sake. And in falling, she discovered her own courage, her own capacity to love without guarantees, to embrace a future that didn't promise forever, but promised enough. They danced at every wedding they attended after that, at her cousin's, at his political allies, at the celebration when Katerina finally found peace and chose to honor her brother's memory with service instead of vengeance. Silvanus never got much better at it, still counted under his breath and occasionally stepped on Rebecca's toes. But he did it anyway every time, because dancing had stopped being about the steps and started being about the choice. The choice to be vulnerable, the choice to try, the choice to reclaim joy from the ashes of old pain, the choice to love fully and completely, even knowing it wouldn't last forever. That was the thing about waltzes, Rebecca thought. They were temporary, 3 minutes of movement and music and partnership. But in those 3 minutes, you could hold someone and move together and create something beautiful that mattered precisely because it was fleeting. Their love was like that, mortal and therefore precious, limited and therefore vital. Every moment mattered because there wouldn't be infinite moments. Every dance was significant because there wouldn't be endless dances. Silvanus, vampire king of the Eastern Territories, had learned to waltz overnight for Rebecca Garrison, and in doing so, He'd learned to live again, to feel again, to believe that the world could still surprise him with gifts worth having even if they came with expiration dates. Rebecca had taught him that, had given him back his courage and his hope and his willingness to be foolish and clumsy and imperfect in pursuit of something real. And if that wasn't a fairy tale worth telling, then nothing was. Years later, when Rebecca was old and Silvanus was not, when they had had their time together and built their life and loved as hard as they could for as long as they could, people would still talk about the night the vampire king danced, about how he'd stumbled and laughed and reclaimed something he'd thought lost forever, about how a human woman had given an ancient creature back his joy, about how love, even temporary love, even love that couldn't last forever, was worth everything. But on that night, after the wedding announcement, with the city lights spread below them and the future uncertain and beautiful ahead of them, they were just Rebecca and Silvanus, human and vampire, dancing through life together, one clumsy waltz step at a time. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.